Good evening. I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible. I know it's getting really late. So basically what I'm going to talk about today is something slightly different to what is spoken to at this point. And I'm going to talk about how entrepreneurship has changed, especially among the highly skilled community. I'm talking about people who come out from the top universities in the world with PhDs, with masters, and how the whole viewpoint, the whole idea of why you would do a PhD has changed over the last 10 years that I have been involved in it. And just to give you a background, I right throughout my PhD, I did several contract projects related to what I specialize on in artificial intelligence, and I built certain systems which are still being used around the world. I'll give you a couple of examples of that. And what I really saw over the last 10 years basically is how the whole mentality, how everything has changed on why somebody would do a PhD. When I come from a family where my father and my grandfather both have PhDs, and the whole idea on why I did a PhD, at least why my parents encouraged me to do a PhD, was to go into academia, become a lecturer, do a postdoc, or join somewhere for research. But this viewpoint now over the last 8 years actually has totally changed. At the time that I was in university, at the time that I had finished my PhD, and at the time that I was working for my university, I actually saw people joining the university for a PhD with the sole intention of finishing the PhD and then going for a startup immediately after that. And there are actually a couple of main reasons why this has happened. And I'm going to walk you through some of these things and mainly talk about why this change has happened, and number two, how this change has happened. And then I'll work you through a couple of my personal experiences where I've actually seen what a big difference these type of people can make once they go into industry and actually try to apply the knowledge that they have to real practical problems instead of coming up with theoretical research, which the world still really needs. But what the world's changing now is that a certain proportion of those people, at least a proportion of the good people, are now going into the commercial sector and trying to start their own companies instead of going into academia. So the main difference is that over the last 10-15 years, it's been a huge rise in the number of PhDs. China produces 40% more PhDs per year over the last 10 years. Over the last 10 years, there have been about 3 or 4 times doubling in the number of PhDs that are produced every year. And the question, of course, is what do all these people do? And as you can see, this is just some stuff I got from Newsweek. And as you can see, the number of PhDs over the years has risen quite exponentially. But the number of time to complete is about the same. But due to funding constraints, due to the cost of education, everything, the number of jobs available for these PhDs within academia have dropped drastically. As you can see, the number of full-time jobs, full-time academic jobs, has almost halved over the last 15 years. What you have is a rise in the number of postdoc opportunities, which is just 1 or 2 year research opportunities after you finish your PhD. But that's just a couple of years, and you still got to find a job after that. And then you got part-time jobs. But basically, you have more people getting PhDs, masters, but less number of jobs available in academia. And this is because governments are now spending less money on universities and also less money on research. So the top universities around the world have to figure out ways to generate money so that they can keep those same standards that they've been maintaining for years. So basically, the main difference that as a person who worked in academia and commercial operations, the main difference I see with commercial research, or what they call research in companies, I'm talking about companies like Pfizer, Glaxo, the top multinational companies, where they first come up with a problem, and then they hire all the people possible to try and solve that problem. So they always start with something that's defined, and they try to come up with different ways that they can solve it. Whereas in academic research, it always starts with somebody coming up with a cool idea or something that they're related to, and they try to prove that the hypothesis works. But then the moment they develop the model, I'm talking 99% of the time, that's where the buck stops. They write a research paper, they publish it, and they move on to doing something else. Of course, pure theoretical research is what the world is. The world is at where it is now because of pure theoretical research. But where a lot of academics have fallen short is that going into business or coming up with a startup, say I'm talking about the 80s and 90s, it was always looked down upon, where if you do a PhD and if you go into starting your own company or you join the private sector, the type of stuff that you will do will be so demeaning that you will always be looked down upon the research community. And it was usually the people who couldn't get jobs in the top universities, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, whatever, that would go and join a company, and a very few of the good guys to go. But now this has really changed. At the time that I was in university, the guys who would get the best PhDs, the guys who would get, do really groundbreaking research, right from the time they start their PhD, the number one thing they're going to talk about is what they're going to do after they finish their PhD, and that would always, more often than not, be starting a company. I would go for lunch with my colleagues, and the only thing that each guy is talking about is business ideas. I want to start this, I want to start that, and this was a huge difference from the time I started to the time I actually finished and came back to Sri Lanka, and I'll walk you through those reasons. So the main reason is that the main universities in the world used to earn a lot of their external money through patent licensing. The university would do some research, they would get a patent, and then they would go and license the patent to some company, Glaxo, Microsoft, Google, whoever, and they would get some money annually based on sales. But this model that universities use has been an absolute failure. If you take the top 400 universities in the world, 50% of the total patenting income that the universities around the world have had has been only earned by 5% of those universities. The other remaining 95% of universities earn almost nothing. Because the patenting method, the way they license it, the way their patenting license schemes are structured are all different. 10% took 70% of the income. So the remaining 90% basically couldn't even cover the administrative cost to maintain and get the patents with the amount of money that they were earning. So because of this, the universities suddenly realized that if they were to be competitive, they have to come up with a different model on how to make money, which is where the whole startup ideas come in. So most universities now work on a model called the nurturing startup model. The main thing that they do is they try to foster their own startups. Instead of taking their own licenses and taking their patents and giving it to somebody else as a license, what they try to do is they try to give it to a company owned by the university itself to try and make some money out of it. And the way they do that is that they try to devote a huge number of university resources to fostering these startups. And what they do is, right from the start, the university where I was at, first year undergraduates, second year undergraduates, third year undergraduates, right from the start, a core component of their course is always entrepreneurship, it's business management. Guys will learn chemistry, physics, mathematics, biology, whatever. These guys are always taught entrepreneurship right at the start. And right from that point, they start thinking about what entrepreneurship is about. And it's no longer thought of as being a demeaning aspect. Basically, it's the... So, what these universities do is, they devote a huge number of university resources to entrepreneurs. They introduce a lot of career incentives to get these entrepreneurs to start. And also they partner with local business incubators and capital investors, VCs, private equity firms and stuff to try and help these guys start off their companies. So, and also many universities around the world now have dedicated institutes which do only this. So, what are the problems that most universities have with the startup culture? Number one, academics are rarely business minded. They come up with the problem, they solve it, and they think that's done and they move on. Whereas now what the universities are trying to teach guys is that solving a problem, coming up with a prototype, is only about 10 to 15% of the actual work done. There's still about 85% of work done before you can actually move on and start a company with it. They obtain funding for initial setup costs, they pay for patenting, stuff like that. So the university I was at, the Side Business School, they had an amazing model where we started off at about the time that I was there, where the university has about 30 or 40 companies being started by the university every year. And the way they do that is, if you have a good idea, and if you can market it, I'll tell you the selection process. But basically what the university does is it provides all the startup costs. It pays for patents. Patents, as you may know, especially international patent, is very expensive. If you get an international patent, it can go into millions of dollars or millions of pounds. So all patent costs are made by the university. Advice and mentoring is provided, everything. And then the way the university system works is that the students who started the company are given 90% of ownership of the company for the first 2 years. So basically, those students have 2 years to bring the company up to profitability, and then they can earn 90% of what the university, what the company actually earns. With the next 2 years, this guy gets 50%, and then after 4 years, the university retains 90% of the ownership. Now this is an amazing system because it gets these guys off the board, it gets these guys some money, it gives them the experience, and the experience to start a company with enormous backing. The best VCs, the best private equity firms, everybody come and help them to start these ventures. And based on this model, the university now produces about 30, 40, 50 companies a year, and each one of these are extremely high-tech companies. New drugs, new cancer drugs, new scanning technologies, new types of materials which are used on jets, which are used in space, whatever. But it's basically because of this, and because of this, everybody wants to start a company through the university. Every single student. So like I said, only 30 or 40, but the university puts out about 1,000 PhDs a year, of which about 100 of them are thinking about starting companies. But the remaining 60%, the moment they leave university, they immediately want to go and start a company as well. Because right from the start point, they are thinking along those lines as well. So what has changed? Basically, academics, right from the start, now most of the academics that we have in universities are taught to think of applications for theoretical things that they do at the same time that they develop the theoretical models. Right at the start, even when we used to go for for theory exams, the lecturers ask us, right, you develop this theory, what can you do with it? What are the practical applications? And right from the start, everybody has to start thinking about, I know this, what can you do with this in the real world? And that's always the question. Entrepreneurship training and mentoring is provided, and also academics, mainly academics, are taught that a good idea is only worth about 10 to 15% of the job. The rest is a totally different ballgame. You may be technical, you may be a brilliant physicist, chemist, biologist, whatever, but just having that idea is useless. You've got to know how to execute it, and that what you already have is only a very, very small percentage of what you need to make that into a company and execute it. So most of the people that I have, I'll call upon some experiences, are the most practical people I know. I've known physicists, chemists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and statisticians who just go out into the world and they're analyzing everything. And I'll go into a couple of examples as you go along. But so just look at. So I'm going to start off with a really good example of something that I personally was involved in. And this is one of the most remarkable entrepreneurship stories that I know. This is a friend of mine in university. He was doing a PhD in physics, where he was using cellular automata and statistics to solve some problems in physics, to solve some gravity problems. And this guy was amazing in statistics. But every time you go into a restaurant, every time you go into wherever you go, he's thinking about what can I do to solve this. And one day, he was at a pub. He was having a beer with a couple of friends, and there was a guy seated next to him. And he started talking to him. And after a while, he realized that this guy was the CEO of the largest private charter jet company in the world. I can't tell you the name because we have an NDA that I signed a while ago, which I can't talk about. But this is the largest charter jet company in the world. It owns about 4,000 charter jets. I'm talking about the Gulf 5, the Gulf 4. This is the company that's used by Madonna, Michael Jackson, everybody to fly around. And the way the model works is that either you buy a plane, or you buy a percentage of a plane and you hand it over to this company, and this company would manage this airplane for you. So if I'm in Sri Lanka, I have a share of a plane, I want a Gulf 5, I call the company and say, please send a plane over, a Gulf 5. They will send a Gulf 5 to Sri Lanka for me to fly to Bangkok, right? And like that, they have this fleet of 4,000 planes which are continuously flying around the world, picking people up, dropping them in another place. And they were telling us that, he had told my friend, that the biggest problem they had, or the biggest cost for their company, was this thing called shuttling flights. Let's say I'm in Sri Lanka, I want to fly to Singapore and I want a Gulf flight. So they got to get a Gulf flight from the closest location, bring it over to my place, bring it over to Sri Lanka, and that flight obviously costs money. You got to pay for the pilot, you got to pay for the fuel, airport charges, whatever. And they said that about 48% of all their flights were all these shuttling flights, and that was a huge cost. Now, this company has been in operation for 15 years, and as you know, all flights, the way people move, the way things happen, all happening according to patterns. There are patterns. If there is a ground tree somewhere, there's a good chance that there's going to be more flights in and out of that particular location, so on and so forth. So what my friend said was, do you have data? He said, yes. How much data can you give me? He said, I can give you 10 years of data. And immediately, he got this data. No names, nothing, just this flight went from this place to this place, this type of plane. And he came back to university. He talked to me and a friend of mine, actually the guy I started the company with. And he said, I have this idea, what do you think? Can we do something? We said, fine. This guy went out, got a loan of 100,000 pounds or something. This was my friend. And he came back and said, right, I'm going to hire you guys for 3 months. He paid us 25,000 pounds, which at the time we were students was amazing. We thought that was brilliant, and we said, fine. We sat down for 3 months, and we wrote this statistical prediction system where we mine this data, and at any point, we would come up with a statistical prediction on where the flight should take off and take off from. So basically, if a flight goes and lands in Paris, we would come up with a prediction on whether we should leave that flight there or send it to another place. And then the deal that this guy worked out with the airline company was that I'm not going to charge you any money for it. I'm going to do this for free. But you use my system in the first year. Just basically don't use my system, but run it alongside your manual system. Because earlier they just had boards and guys with a board, and they should decide which plane to go there. And he said, calculate how much saving you would have made in your first year if you use my system and pay me that money. Right? And this is what I did. And so basically we built the system. They used it alongside that system for 1 year. And at the end of the 1 year, they found that if they had used our system to predict which flight to send where, they would have reduced their shuttle cost, shuttling by 2%. Now 2% in a $2 billion revenue company worked out to something like a $50 million. This guy, within 1 year, earned $50 million on 100,000 investment. Now this is what I mean. People who have that knowledge, people who know how to execute amazing stuff, the moment they go into industry, they can actually make a significant change on how things happen. And this is what we need we need more and more people like that to go into industry and actually start companies which do amazing things. Things that nobody even thought of. The moment we build that using hidden Markov models, genetic algorithms, it's just a prediction system. As far as mathematics go, it's simple as you get. We have a variance, we build it, get addition, we decide whether to send the plane somewhere or not, and that's it. And that's it. And this for me is one of the most remarkable stories I've heard, because he took a risk, but he had the confidence in his ability and his knowledge, and also he was a PhD student at Oxford, so he could go to this company and say, I'm really good at statistics, give me this job, I can do this for you. And that's where the credibility factor comes in. Having that educational background behind you to be able to do that is a huge plus. It's only a plus, it's not the prerequisite, but it's a huge plus to have that. So then this is something that I personally worked on as well. Once again, with that earlier project, we were students, so all we earned was that 25,000 pounds. This guy earned 15 million pounds, which we didn't get any of. But for us at the time, 25,000 pounds was more than I was getting from the university on my grant or whatever, so we were happy. This was my first job after university, where I once again worked for the university, and we worked on cancer research. And what we were doing was, once again, this was an instance where I was able to go into a pre-existing industry, and using my knowledge, which I had done for my PhD, my studies, whatever, I was able to change the way this whole thing worked. And just to give you a background, this is a conceptual representation of a protein. Protein is a 3D structure with lots of molecules here and there, and everything in our body, from the sweating to skin growth to everything, works with a protein. There are millions of proteins floating around our body, and proteins have a particular shape. If the shape changes, it does something else. So for example, cell division for cancer, there are particular proteins which, when they get a certain shape, the cells start to divide. So basically what you can do is you can try and block the protein from changing shape, which can then stop the cell from dividing, which can stop the cancer from spreading. And the way it works is, you try to poke a small molecule in the middle here to try and prevent it from turning, but it's got to have the correct interactions so that the protein doesn't assume the shape that it should be in. And this is basically a drug. This is what goes into a pill. So what normally they used to do is that, number one, in the industry they used to take this protein and just hundreds and hundreds of researchers used to take chemical compounds and keep dropping it into petri dishes and see if something happens. But once again, even if you have 1,000 researchers working over a year, you can probably test about I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 compounds, which is nowhere near enough what you need. Whereas my university, the difference was that they had a database of 40 million compounds. Basically, they have the chemical definition of this particular ligand or that compound, and then using that, what the university used to do was they used to take this individual protein, take each compound that they had in their database and evaluate it against the protein to see if they can get it to change its shape. And then basically you have to screen 40 million compounds. A single compound usually takes about half an hour to screen. So even then, the university had a cluster of 1,000 pieces, and to screen the whole database of 40 million compounds used to take about a 2-month processing run, but still they used to do it. And then they run the screening test. They try to find the 10 best molecules which are the 50 best molecules which are possible drugs, and then that 50 is sent into a lab, which might eventually be turned into a drug. But once again, the fact that this cluster of 1,000 computers still took 2 months to do basically meant that they could only do 6 proteins a year, which was a huge inhibiting factor. I joined this company once the system was built, and we went and basically what I did was I changed this whole search algorithm to use hidden markup models, genetic algorithms, hill searching, whatever. And we were able to, once again, using what I had done for my PhD, we were able to reduce that processing time where a single ligand could be evaluated in 1 second. And we were able to change the system so that the entire database of 40 million molecules could be evaluated in 1 day compared to 2 months. Now this system, I was given shares of the company at that time, and once again one of these bad decisions that I made along the way. Right at the time I delivered this system, I decided to come back to Sri Lanka and start this company. So I sold off my shares and came back. But this company now was sold last year for $500 million, 500 million pounds, and it was mainly based on this change that we made. Now once again, I was able to identify what could be done and what are the possibilities because of what I knew of the knowledge that I was able to bring in, and I was able to execute it myself. This is what I do now, which is we do what's called simulations training. Once again, this is another story of how we will use what we do. We build games. But what are called serious games. We build games for training where people can play our games and train themselves for real world situations. And once again, this company I started with my friend, the initial friend of mine who worked on that airline system. We started this company together, and this was one of those very, very unique companies that we started, and the actual path that we took to where we are now has been very, very different to pretty much every single story that we've heard up to this point. We initially started with the two of us working in our houses. We spent a couple of months to develop a small prototype. Then we took it to the Australian government. They liked it. They gave us a grant, which basically paid our salaries for 1 year, mine and my friends. And then using that money, we came back to Sri Lanka and we hired 3 guys. One of whom is here. We hired 3 guys, and with that money, we were able to develop. We grew to about 10 after 1 year. But once again, we used that money that we got as a grant. We delivered it to our customers, but the deal that we struck, we were very smart with that. We said that we'll develop this on contract for you, but we want to retain the intellectual property of what we built for you. And the moment we delivered it, we went and sold it to lots and lots of other people. US government, the British government, the Canadians, Australians, Kiwis, everybody knows our software. But now we've grown to a company of about 110 people. But once again, we were really lucky about the way we started. We were in the right place at the right time, and we had the credibility once again to go to the Australian government and say, we can do this. This is what we can do. And up to this point, both of us retain 100% ownership of the company, which once again is just about being in the right place at the right time. And up to this point, and this is one of the new products that we've been developing. And this once again is one of those very interesting stories where we went and pretty much all the money that we've earned up to this point have been come in two ways. First way is that we sell the software that we build as commercial off-the-shelf products, but the rest of the money that we earn is on contracted work. But we are yet to bid for a contract. Every single job that we've done has been on unsolicited proposals, where we come up with a cool idea and we go and show it to the Australian government, the British government, the US government, and say, right, we can do this, do you want us to do it? And up to this point, we haven't been rejected on a single unsolicited proposal that we have taken to them. And this is once again an unsolicited proposal that we gave to Boeing, a Boeing company who makes aeroplanes. They went and said they were looking for a trainer. They wanted a solution where they could inject people into their simulations. An out-of-the-box solution where you could just give any terrain, bang, and you can have people walking around to make it more realistic. This took us about 4 years. Yeah, it took us about 4 years, but we finally delivered it. And now we own the product and we are about to launch it. And already the US government has bought this software because US government uses simulations hugely. They use it for almost everything. And this was like almost a perfect solution. But once again, I just want to highlight the different business model that we have. But the biggest plus that we had so far has been the credibility, has been our background and also our track record, the fact that we've delivered our products. And because of that, we've basically been able to build a very unique company basically with our own money, to a level where we haven't had to go to VCs or project reference or whatever to get that work done. Right. So overall, what's the take-home message? Education no longer is an avenue to go into academia, to teaching or research. Education now is thought of as more as being an avenue to get into entrepreneurship and startups than ever before. If you actually take the hierarchy of people I did my PhD with, the really, really good people, the guys who did amazing PhDs, the Rhodes Scholars, the Camden Scholars, whoever, pretty much all of them are running their own companies now. Whereas the guys who were self-funded or came with, were working at Sainsbury's and somehow making sure that they were able to pay their fees, those are the guys who are working for universities. So the top-run guys are all now entrepreneurs. They're all running their own companies. So basically, education now is a path into entrepreneurship. It's a serious path, and most of the really, really top people are going into entrepreneurship, starting their own companies, generating amazing ideas. Some of the companies that I've seen some of my friends come up with have been phenomenal, from physics to chemistry, statistics to whatever. And more and more of these disruptive technologies are being developed by these large scientists. And eventually, it's very rarely that scientists take a company right to the end. They usually look for an exit at some point, because after a certain point, as you all know, most companies become more about management after a certain point rather than your actual technical skill. But they just move on. The friend I told you who earned $50 million, last year I know he earned $200 million. He owns his own plane now from that same company, which is managed by the same company. But once again, this is what this is. There's a guy with a physics PhD who was working on cellular automata, which is the most random thing imaginable in the world. But yeah, that's the way the world is working. And I just want to stress on the fact that you really have to market yourself well. And the better you are, the more credible you are, the more knowledge you have, the more credibility you will have when talking to VCs, when talking this thing. And also, it also helps you generate ideas. And like us, every single product that I worked on at this point has been a niche product. I've been working on products which nobody else in the world is working on. And that's an amazing thing to be able to do. But to generate those ideas, you usually have to have some sort of background to be able to get that idea. And yeah, and that's about it.